Welcome back to Blitzkrieg Intel Update. I'm Nabbers Hunter here with TAC, WaterKH, and Liz is a Dolphin to discuss the Gorod Krovi cipher scraps, the MASM assembly language ciphers that we call the Pablo cipher and the King cipher. Water, so you kind of led the charge with this last night in transcribing the program and really sticking with it. You want to tell our viewers how this kind of unfolded?
Yeah, so I know a little bit of the community found some scraps. Liz actually handed me off kind of the compiled versions of these scraps, mentioning that there is some kind of assembly language. So I actually had a little bit of experience working with MIPS, which is kind of what Unix and Mac kind of use for compiling. So when I finished it, I tried to run it, but it actually doesn't work on Mac because it's a Windows assembly language. So it's me, TAC, Liz is a Dolphin, Hunter, and Oxen8 that actually transcribed these numbers from the scraps of paper and fed it into the program, which gave us our answers.
And that took us, 9.5 hours, I believe it was?
Yeah,
of course,
crazy.
TAC had been on the phone for even longer. He reached a grand total of 11.5 hours that night. So I'm gonna go into the plain text now. Another thing that I want to note before I start is that there are a couple things that didn't ever quite come out right. 2 different words, so I will make note of those as I come to them. My name is Pablo, or at least I think it is, or was. I don't know anymore. I have been locked away, held prisoner in this cell for many months by German scientists. They keep experimenting on me, pumping me full of some blue liquid. I think it is responsible for the repeated visions I have been having, which I swear look and feel real. In this vision, my name is Pablo Marinus, and I am a knight coming back from the Crusades. This is one of the words that we couldn't quite get right. Ivan fight in a great battle against strange demon-like creatures who are trying to devour the earth. At one point, it appears I am doomed, trapped in the tentacles of a great 3-headed beast, when suddenly 4 knights decimate it with magical, elemental staves, saving me from certain death. There are, and here's another word, IHFF, otherworldly creatures that fight on our side against the demons. The creepy thing is that the sigils on their tunics resemble the ones I noticed on stones here at the castle as I was being brought to my cell. I just hope I can eventually find a way to escape this. So that was the Pablo cipher. The second cipher was another collection of scraps that were found that we call the King cipher, which is as follows. While I consider myself to be a brave king in battle, I will tell you, my son, that those 4 were the bravest warriors I have ever seen. I had the privilege to fight alongside them in the great battle many years ago, where we defeated the creatures from beyond and the Dead Eaters. They disappeared after we claimed victory, never to be heard from again. The last thing they told me was to build my castle here, in this very location, before they disappeared.
Woo!
I'm going to say it right now. I'm not even going to say it, actually. So, guys, this is almost like outside of the zombie storyline. It feels like it switches from like German scientists and experimentation to straight up documentation of the medieval activity that we've seen depicted on a number of occasions as far back as Origins. So we'll start with Liz. Liz, what are your thoughts on the Pablo cipher?
It is so interesting just hearing from a character who we've only heard of a few times before, and for him to give us such a big piece of information. I mean, we've only heard of him back in Origins, where Richtofen mentioned in one of his letters from the field that he had his diary or journal. And then we also saw in Der Eisendrache that there was a spleen in a plate sort of thing that had the name Pablo on it. So to see that mixed in with all of the great battle and, these magical elemental staves.
Really interesting cast back to Origins there. Like, out of the blue, all of a sudden, here are the staves again, kind of a reference to Primus and to the scraps that we got in Origins that depicted Primus. Yeah, a lot of holes that were actually filled in that one there. So, TAC, you had a bit of a controversial perspective on this cipher as well. You want to expound on that?
Yeah, so, I'm not going to, I'll start this off. I'm not going to claim this as anything other than, me postulating this or speculating. But, the way that he says, my name is Pablo, or at least I think it is, or was, that part, and then where he says, he's having a lot of visions, and he says, in this vision, my name is Pablo Marinus, and I'm a knight coming back from the Crusades. Like, it makes me wonder if this individual who they're pumping full of, liquid divinium, if it's even Pablo. I don't know, all the phrasing about how, he thinks he's Pablo, but he might not be, it kinda, I don't know who that means it would be, or, what exactly that means, but I find it really interesting that they kinda open that door up. I don't know what to make of it.
Yeah, so going off that a little bit, there was actually a cipher solved in ZNS that kind of gives me the same kind of feeling, and it starts off as, my name is my name. My name? Oh yes, it is Gersh. So it's kind of like he's remembering it, but it's like it takes him a minute. So he's kind of like, he doesn't know who his identity is. Kind of like in here, where Pablo is very unclear of his identity.
This seems to be happening repeatedly. That's a good point. There are a number of individuals who are not even quite sure of their own identity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, it should also be brought up as the Monty quotes have started kind of pouring in. He makes a comment to Dempsey about how Dempsey is giving back field reports to absolutely no one because of the 115 delusion. So, I guess going off of this Pablo Marinus cipher, perhaps my interpretation's entirely wrong, and it's just the illusions, or just the 115 just kind of messing with him, and it's nothing more than that.
That's one of the factors that makes so much difficult at this point, is that we're really, really beginning to see and experience the effects of 115 on the minds of the people who've been exposed to it. Whereas in the past, in Black Ops 1 and World at War and so on, we heard more about it in retrospect and not so much actively. Here it's in ciphers, it's in character quotes, and it's very, very in our face. So
it's very real.
Yeah, we're getting to the point where I think that Maxis has always been at, where we can't be sure of what's real and what isn't anymore.
So, moving a little bit down, we have that part where it says Ivan fight in a great battle against strange demon-like creatures. And then a little bit more down, it says trapped in the tentacles of a great three-headed beast. And we've seen that beast actually in Shadows of Evil, which is the Margwa. And also on the mural in the Pack-a-Punch room, kind of depicts this kind of great battle with all these creatures and keepers. And then it has those 4 knights with the staves, which most people think is Primus.
And actually, the king is on that mural as well, isn't he?
A king, or at least a king. Maybe not the king.
Yeah, that's right, a king.
And then even farther down towards the end of the cipher, it talks about the otherworldly creatures that are fighting, with these 4 warriors, or the 4 knights. And he talks about as he's being escorted to Der Eisendrache, to the castle, he noticed the sigils on their tunics, and as you'll see on screen, that's the keepers. You can see the imprints in the wall match very closely the depictions on their tunics and their armor and whatnot. So that should be pointed out that those are keepers that he's referring to there.
And these are those objects that we actually power up in the Der Eisendrache Easter egg, correct?
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
And also another thing to note about sigils is that there's some kind of like magical symbols. They like hold some kind of power.
Yeah, they are magical symbols that you generally put your will into when you create them. Although generally, in this way, it's not talking about what is seen as a sigil today. It's a bit different. The sigil is what looks like a version of the Black Sun that we've seen elsewhere.
Okay. All right, so let's move along to the King cipher. It's from the perspective of a king talking to his son. We discussed before recording, and apparently we have some differing views, and I think all of them are very interesting. Now, what I kind of gathered from this was that the king that we're seeing in the Der Eisendrache paintings, for the wolf bow specifically, that king is not the same as is speaking in this cipher. Like I said, this is my perspective of it. I would say that king is the son that is being referred to, specifically because in the paintings, in the paintings, we see that the king actually dies in the battle against the Apothicons. Also, that the castle is already built by the time of this attack. So in the cipher, the castle number 1 has not been built, and the king actually survives the great battle with the otherworldly beings. So that would seem to indicate to me, just based on the fact that the king didn't survive and the castle exists, that the king in those paintings is actually his son who's being referred to in the ciphers.
And just as like a general counterpoint, just to kind of get some discussion going, this cipher could have been actually created before the attack. So it could be that this king that we're talking about is the king in the paintings, but this is just before he's built it, and then after he's built it, then the attack comes and then he passes away.
That is also a possibility. That's true. Tack, however, you had an opposing view on that. You want to talk further?
Yeah, well, this was kind of before I had heard your interpretation about it being the sun, because that's something I hadn't really thought of, and now that you bring it up, I think it's a great point. But when I first saw this, my initial thought was, how could that? Yeah, in Eisendrache we see the painting of the Apothicon, or the Kraken, as we like to call it, attacking the castle. So I was trying to figure out, if that wasn't the great battle that was being depicted there, what exactly would that be? And so I thought maybe, that's the one to come, since we keep on having these ideas of we are going to go into the future and we're going to not go into the future, but we're going to go into the next map and have this huge great battle, pretty much redo it, rehash it out with everyone, with the Apothicons and Keepers and all that. So I was thinking maybe that would be a futuristic depiction of that, but, now that I look at it, that doesn't quite make a whole lot of sense. So I'm going to rescind that.
All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for another jam-packed episode. And folks, thanks so much for watching. We will see y'all in the next one.